What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you the final installment of our Dynasty ranking series we do over here at the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel. So if you guys are watching this video, you have already seen the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receiver videos being dropped. We got to wrap it up, baby. We're talking about the tight ends and really going in depth. Everybody knows the top options, but we're going to be going through the guys that nobody's really considering at the end of the top 10 because, let's be honest here, tight end is a wasteland. But if you're able to spot those guys that aren't in the consensus and being able to get that upper advantage on your league on them, you're just winning half the battle, as we've mentioned multiple times. Last year, during this season, it's a huge advantage spotting the breakout tight end.
Yeah, totally agree. If you're able to spot one of these late round guys and they turn into a Mark Andrews, they turn into a TJ Hockenson, they turn into a Darren Waller, even George Kittle especially, that's really how you get an advantage in a dynasty league, right? Because if you're looking for an elite tight end, chances are you got to spend up for them. But if you spot those one or two guys that over the next couple seasons emerge into that elite territory, then you're going to get a huge leg up on your competition because those people had to spend a first, second, third round pick on George Kittle or Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, especially in tight end premium leagues. This would be all the more important, obviously, because if any one of these like later round guys get into that tight end premium territory where those guys are going in the first, second round of tight end premium drafts, that's really where you make your money back.
Yeah, 100%. So with that being said, going to hit the intro. Okay, so Corey, we can start off with the one, and we actually have a tie at one here, and I'll let you break it off with your number one. Take it away with George Kittle, tight end from the Niners.
Okay, so some people might be mad that we don't have Travis Kelce as our one consensus, and it's my fault. You can yell at me because both guys are phenomenal options, right? George Kittle and Travis Kelce, the consensus top two tight ends. I prefer George Kittle. And the reason is because I talked about 3 to 4 year windows yesterday with wide receivers. The same is true for tight ends, right? They're both pass catchers. It's basically the same, life expectancy in the NFL. When we're talking about George Kittle 3 to 4 years from now, we're talking about George Kittle at age 30 to 31. He's currently 27 and a half right now. Kelce would be 34 to 35 3 to 4 years from now. And yes, Travis Kelce will probably be the better tight end this upcoming season, but I don't think it's any guarantee that we'll see the same elite level production for the next 2, 3, 4 years out of Travis Kelce. Plus, we had Kittle playing in an offense over the last couple of years led by Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Mullins, a number of other quarterbacks that, aren't worth a flying you-know-what. And the past few seasons, we still saw him produce. We still saw him go out on the field, break, tight end records of receiving yards. And if Lance can be a Justin Herbert, even like a Kyler Murray level of quarterback, we're talking about Kittle finally having the touchdown upside that he has never had. George Kittle's career high in touchdowns in a single season is 5. He had 2 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, and 2 touchdowns over the course of his 4 NFL seasons. The fact that Kittle has never had a season of more than 5 touchdowns is a testament to the QB play in San Francisco, 1, and 2, the level of upside this guy still has. Because if he has a 10 touchdown season with his 1,200, 1,300 yards, then we're going to see that Travis Kelce level production. And I think that ends this year. I think it's enough, coupled with the age discrepancy between those two guys, 3 to 4 years of age discrepancy, to push Kittle ahead of Kelce convincingly for me this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I mean, even on a week-to-week basis, don't get me wrong, Kelce has clear upside, as I'm going to mention in my argument for him as one. But does he have upside that Kittle has out of the wazoo? We're talking about a guy who in week, I think was it week 3, week 4, where he literally put up nearly 41 tight end premium full PPR points per game against the Eagles. 15 for 183 and a touchdown.
He only had 1 touchdown in that game. That's what I mean. Like George Kittle, he had 180 yards against the Philadelphia Eagles. He caught 15 passes. Yeah. That level of volume is not something that Travis Kelce can see on a given week, which, yeah, you could say that George Kittle, you got Brandon Ayuk now emerging, you got Deebo Samuel now emerging there, but George Kittle is the target hierarchy of that offense. He's the guy that's going to get his. If Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel they're competing with each other. They're not competing with George Kittle. It's a different area of the field. Everybody knows that George Kittle is the guy to stop in that offense. And I think when you finally get a quarterback upgrade. Like, they have never had a quarterback like this. And whatever you think of Trey Lance, he's going to be better than Jimmy Garoppolo as early as his rookie season. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah, 100%. I fully understand the argument for Kittle at 1. The reason why I have our tied for 1 at this list, we'll go by 2 for easy sake, at Travis Kelce. The reason why he's my number 1, it's simple. What did he finish last year? Okay. What did he finish the year before that? What about the year before that? No. But what about the year before that? No. But the year before that. Yes, this is a guy who's finished tight end 1 every single season since 2016. He's coming off a historic season at the tight end position, broke the tight end receiving yards record, and is still tethered to the best right arm in football. And as much as I love Kittle, I am a huge advocate for George Kittle. I think from a talent standpoint, he is the best tight end in the NFL. But the volume that Kelce sees, even though he's not the main target in his offense, is still insane. I mean, he's gotten over 136 targets the past 3 years and is coming off a season where he literally, get this, over 1,400 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns in 15 games. And while we said that for Tyreek Hill yesterday, that he's a lock for 12-plus touchdowns every year, in that same vein, with Tyreek Hill being a lock for 12-plus, we can basically say that Travis Kelce is a lock for 8+ in this offense. So overall, I mean, I think Travis Kelce, in terms of a win now asset, is the best tight end to acquire. But if you want to look at it as we've talked about with the running backs and receivers, Travis Kelce is more of a depreciating asset, whereas George Kittle is still an appreciating asset. So if you want to make the argument that long-term George Kittle will be worth more in Dynasty, I can hear it. But if you're winning now, if you're taking this guy in the 3rd round and you want him to be the pivotal cornerstone of your team, I think Travis Kelce is a good way to go.
Yeah, and for me, I will take George Kittle in both situations. Win now or rebuild, I will take George Kittle. And the reason is because there's an ADP discrepancy between these guys, like a small one, but it's about half a round, I would say, in a startup. But George Kittle, that 4-year age discrepancy, man, like it's a big deal for me. I think it is a big deal. And Kelce, while he hasn't shown any signs of decline, we didn't think Rob Gronkowski had shown any signs of decline until, the year that he did. I believe it was 2019 that he came out, or 2018 that he came out, and he had like a big time down season. If something like that happens to Kelce, there goes his value. All that value that you spent on him, that early 2nd round pick or whatever that it took you to get him, is all down the shitter. If George Kittle has a season like that, that doesn't happen, right? Because he's still going to be 28 years old. He'll still have plenty of valuable seasons going forward. We even saw this year that he got injured this year. He was injury riddled this season, and he's still a top 2-round startup pick, right? So that value isn't going anywhere with George Kittle. It's a riskier investment for Travis Kelce. That's basically the reason I would pick George Kittle ahead of Kelce. And
I fully agree with that sentiment. Yes, we talked about it, again, as I said, with the RB's receivers. The appreciating versus depreciating asset kind of conundrum in Dynasty is how you get that upper edge. If we're talking about in a startup right now, who would I rather have at face value, same pick? Yeah, I would slightly prefer Kelce. But if you're talking about the ADP discrepancy, if you're talking about how I've structured my team, if I have a younger team, I will take George Kittle because, quite frankly, I know Travis Kelce has a better chance of going down in value this year compared to George Kittle. So I fully agree with that. And with that being said, we can talk about a guy who, in George Kittle's absence, really showed himself to be amongst the elite of the elite at the position. Take it away with Waller the baller himself, Darren Waller.
Right. And Darren Waller, the fact that we have a tight end with multiple double-digit target games, let alone 7 of them last year. He had 7 games of double-digit targets at tight end 3. The fact that he's not a top 2 tight end is pretty insane considering what we usually have to deal with at this position over the past couple of years. Darren Waller is basically a much better version of what Zach Ertz was prior to the past couple seasons.
Much better.
Yeah. Waller is the engine of that offense. And with Aguilar now departing, any step forward that these young receivers take, right? Brian Edwards and Henry Ruggs and some of these other guys that are there, that shouldn't cut into Waller's, target baseline because those guys are taking away the targets that Aguilar left behind. So I'm not worried about any of the young receivers that they have taking a step forward and taking away from Darren Waller. They didn't bring in any, they didn't go after Kenny Golladay, which we thought could have been a possibility for them. They didn't go after Allen Robinson. They didn't go after some of these other guys, Will Fuller, even that hit free agency, or Juju Smith-Schuster. What I'm hoping and what I'm betting is that with Henry Ruggs, I still believe in Henry Ruggs. I think you still believe in Henry Ruggs as well, but to a much less degree than I do. I think these two guys can complement each other's games very, very well once they, are both healthy on the field. And hopefully Ruggs is able with a full offseason to get more acclimated to the NFL. I think the possession option that Darren Waller presents can be complemented by the deep threat. And I'm not saying they're going to be Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but that's the type of framework that John Gruden has seen in his own division for the past couple of years. And I'm sure that's what he wants to replicate in his own offense. And those two can make their jobs easier on each other. And maybe they add another piece later in free agency to add to this team. Maybe they go out and try and get a Julio Jones or something like that. But either way, there is a legitimate argument, in my opinion, to be made between Kelce and Waller from a long-term perspective. But for the time being, the ceiling from a touchdown perspective, the ceiling from a offensive projection perspective isn't close, because there's no one in their right mind that would say Derek Carr and the Raiders offense, with the state of their offensive line after all their losses and the fact that they don't have a consistent receiver quite yet, we can't possibly put Waller ahead of Travis Kelce, because Kelce, at least for the next 2 years, I would say, is going to be a top 3 tight end, guaranteed, locked and loaded. And he's going to have the ceiling to be a league winner relative to other positions, because Darren Waller could be a top 3 tight end next year, but maybe he sees a downtick in production to the point that he's not that big time advantage at the position. He's just a top 3 tight end.
Yeah, no, I definitely see it. We saw it this year. I mean, Travis Kelce, what he was doing over the competition was insane. For reference, in PPR points per game, as good as Darren Waller was, we're talking about a 100 catch, 1,200 yard, 9 touchdown season with the tight end position, which is amongst the elite of the elite. Travis Kelce averaged nearly 4 points per game higher than him in PPR formats. Yes, you heard that correctly. And I mentioned it with Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill in the receiver video. That is basically the same difference between Derrick Henry and Myles Gaskin in PPR formats.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Wait, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a big time difference, and you can't reasonably sit here until we see Kelce decline at all and reasonably say that Darren Waller should be ranked higher, because the age difference isn't big enough. If Darren Waller is 25 years old, we might be having a different discussion, but Darren Waller is 29. Or he will be 29. So this is a closer discussion, because all 3 of these elite tight ends are, I would say, in the prime of their careers. None of them are, achieving their prime or have yet to achieve their prime. They're all in the prime of their careers. None of them are 24, 25 years old. And that's why we can transition to a guy right now who is definitely at a very big advantage from an age perspective over the guys around him. Take it away with Kyle Pitts.
Yes, Kyle Pitts, tight end from the Atlanta Falcons. The hype is real. This is a generational tight end prospect. I know you hear that term thrown around loosely around Twitter. You hear that thrown around loosely around NFL media. But this is the definition of generational. We're talking about a 99th percentile athlete at the position who produced like a madman in his true junior season in college, 770 yards and 12 touchdowns in only 8 games played this year. And he had both phenomenal tape and the requisite draft capital we look for with the 4th overall pick in this past NFL draft. I mean, is it a projection to have him at 4? Yes. But if this guy lives up to his hype, he will not only be the industry's consensus tight end 1, yes, ahead of Travis Kelce and George Kittle, but he'll still have appreciating value compared to this guy. You mentioned the age of George Kittle, 27 going on 28. The age of Travis Kelce, he's 31. We're talking about Kyle Pitts, who is not even legal to drink in the United States right now. Yes. So overall, I get that he's a 21-year-old kid. He hasn't proven anything in the NFL, but this is the tight end that I feel most comfortable with projecting to that Kelce Waller type pro projection. And I feel ultra confident that he's going to end up reaching there. It's just for me personally, again, I think you're the same. I cannot put him above those finished products just quite yet until I see it. However, if somebody were to tell me right now, oh, I have Kyle Pitts in my top 3 dynasty tight ends, I would understand their rationale. They're basically pointing at that projection. They're pointing at the age, and they're pointing at his appreciating value over these years. I think Kyle Pitts could be at his absolute lowest value in startups in terms of where he's going comparatively to where he could be in 2-3 years if he's coming off a 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown campaign, which is well within the realm of possibilities for him.
Yeah, and even if he doesn't have that kind of season, right? Even if he comes out and he has 700 yards and 8 touchdowns, that will be enough. That's about what Mark Andrews produces on a yearly basis. That will be enough for people to rank him for sure ahead of Kelce and Waller with that age, and maybe even ahead of Kittle as well. So those two, like with Kyle Pitts, we got to take into account that this guy is 7 years younger than George Kittle. 7 years, which doesn't seem like that big of a difference. If you said, like, how much older is George Kittle than Kyle Pitts, a lot of people would probably think he's only 3 or 4 years older than him. But a 7-year age difference is a big deal, and that can't be discounted. And I'm not one of the people that, looks ahead to 5 years from now where these guys would be. But Kyle Pitts decisively has that advantage. And if we're able to see that right away from him in the NFL, which I think is going to be the case, because I totally agree. I mean, before Kyle Pitts, what was like Noah Fant, OJ Howard, were these like the next best tight end prospects coming out?
Hockenson.
Like Kyle Pitts is on a completely different level than these guys. This is a dude that was universally considered a gold jacket type of talent by every NFL team across the entire league. I'm willing to bet that 20 out of the 32 teams had him as the number one prospect in this draft.
Yeah, definitely. And at minimum, he would have been the number 2 if people had Lawrence at 1. That is how talented this kid is. That is what his projection states going into the NFL. I absolutely agree. If you can get this guy, again, you mentioned that anywhere between that 105, 107 range in your Superflex rookie drafts, he's going to be well worth the pick. Because even aside from the production alone, in terms of appreciating value, this guy's going to be worth well more than that, even if he shows a sliver of his potential this year or next year. So with that being said, taken away with Mark Andrews, the tight end of Lamar Jackson.
Right. And Mark Andrews is a guy that unlike George Kittle, unlike Darren Waller, unlike Travis Kelce, he is a little bit more of a could grow into something more, because this guy's only 24 years old, right? He came in the same draft class as George Kittle, but he's like 3 years younger than him. Probably one of the more sneaky winners of the NFL draft, in my opinion, because Andrews was a player that was probably never going to be a 120 target tight end, at least not yet in his career. But the great thing for Andrews is that the potential efficiency uptick that he could see and overall passing volume uptick of the Baltimore Ravens offense that I expect to see from the Ravens going forward should be enough to help propel him into maybe the next tier of tight end. Maybe he doesn't become next, like, with Darren Waller and Kelce and Kittle, but maybe he's closer than he is now, because right now it's a pretty decisive gap between those guys. And I've been saying this, all offseason so far, but I think Greg Roman is set to innovate his offense for the second time in 3 years. With the addition of Bateman, with the addition of Wallace, with some of the other young pieces that they already have in place in the receiving core, Roman immediately came out and talked about adding balance to the offense. And normally, as I've talked about, we hear this in the opposite direction. When a team's passing the ball too much, they usually want to run the ball more. But Greg Roman threw the ball in the Ravens offense 406 times last year, which was by far the lowest in the NFL. And if that goes up to 480 times, 74 more pass attempts, they would still be 31st in the NFL. And 74 more pass attempts for a target share of Mark Andrews is enough to propel him over the 100 target mark and probably get him over double-digit touchdowns as well. So this is a guy that is as locked and loaded as a tier 2 tight end as there is, in my opinion. He's the only guy that I would pick ahead of Kyle Pitts that's not one of the top 3 tight ends. And I know you have Pitts ranked higher. I personally would take Andrews because I think he has more proven production. And I also think he has potential for a target uptick and, an efficiency uptick as well.
That's definitely fair. I do think Mark Andrews still has untapped potential. I just don't ever see him, again, as you mentioned, being that 120, 130 target guy that I see a Kyle Pitts being. And not to mention in terms of overall value, I just think Kyle Pitts has a ways to go in terms of where he can end up projecting. Like, he can be the consensus tight end 1. I don't necessarily think that Mark Andrews can be. However, does that mean I dislike Mark Andrews? Absolutely not. I think he is a clear-cut tier 2 tight end. And quite frankly, outside of those top 3, if you want to take this guy in the 6th round of your dynasty drafts, I would be fine with that type of value. 5th round of your dynasty drafts, I would be fine with that value because, quite frankly, he's a young asset tied to a really good right arm with Lamar Jackson and has proven to be a elite touchdown scorer in the NFL. Right. So I do like the placement of him here.
He's got a bit of a safer projection compared to Pitts, right? Because with Kyle Pitts, we have the uncertainty of Matt Ryan's future. They potentially were going to replace him this year. We don't know what his status is going to be going forward, and that's kind of a looming question mark with Kyle Pitts. At least we know with Mark Andrews, while Lamar Jackson's not the best passer in the NFL, he's at worst a top 15 quarterback from a passing perspective in the NFL. And what he adds with his rushing will guarantee efficiency across the board for all of his pass catchers. So from that perspective, he's probably tied to a top 8 quarterback in the NFL. So that is something that can't be understated with Mark Andrews. And the reason that he's so successful in the red zone is because of the threat of the run from both Dobbins and from Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards alike.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. With that being said, I'm going to be talking about next TJ Hockenson, tight end from the Lions, a guy that narrowly edged out Andrews for me in my personal rankings. And we talked about Kyle Pitts. He's the best tight end prospect since Vernon Davis. If we're talking about a second best tight end prospect to come out since Vernon Davis, I think Hockenson would be well worth that number 2 spot. Again, this is a guy who has that top 10 draft capital, who proved over his time in college at Iowa that he was an elite prospect. And as a second-year tight end this past season, he proved to be an efficient, a productive receiving option. 101 targets, 67 receptions for 723 yards, and 6 touchdowns in his second campaign. And the opportunity to grow into that top tier asset is clearly there in Detroit now. First off, Detroit is one of the most barren teams in terms of receiving assets in the entire NFL, as I mentioned with the running back video when I talked about DeAndre Swift. They vacate nearly 300 targets and lose their top 2 wide receivers from last year in Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. And what Hockenson showed me in tier 2 is that he can be not only a steady threat for this team, steady tight option for this team, but I think he can take that next step into the dynamic featured role for a rebuilding young Lions offense. And if you were to tell me going past this season, going into next year, that Hockenson's coming off a 130 target, 80 reception, 1,000 yard, 8 touchdown type of campaign, I would not be shocked, because the opportunity to grow into that role is significantly there for the Lions, given that sheer lack of talent that they have on the outside.
Right. And here's another guy that could be ranked ahead of Kyle Pitts. If you're scared about, the fact that Kyle Pitts is a rookie, this is another guy I would understand if you had ranked ahead of Kyle Pitts, because like you said, the opportunity is absolutely there. How good is the offense? Probably not that great. They're probably a team that has, a top 5, top 10 pick at minimum. Yeah. And that could negatively affect TJ Hockenson's touchdown output and the ability for the Lions to move the ball on offense. But they have nobody else to throw to, like literally nobody else in their receiving core. If anybody thinks Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to come in and get 1,400 yards, they're sorely mistaken. TJ Hockenson is the only established pass catching option in that backfield outside of the running back that they have in DeAndre Swift. And I think Hockenson is probably due for at minimum what he did this year, if not probably 20%, 30% more than what he did this year.
Yep, I fully agree. And you're talking about 20, 30% more. You're talking about 130 targets versus 101 targets that he saw this year. So the opportunity is clearly there. With that being said, this is the next guy is another guy that I'm really intrigued by. But the problem, again, would be the quarterback situation. But according to rumors, he might be having a huge upgrade coming soon. And take it away with Noah Fant.
Yeah, Noah Fant is probably a worthy investment from a lot of different angles. In our Dynasty League, I literally just named him beachfront real estate because I think he's only bound to appreciate going forward. And the reason is because Noah Fant's a 23-year-old tight end, right? He's very young. He's coming off a near 100 target and 700-yard sophomore season, pretty much similar to his former Iowa teammate and TJ Hockenson. He came and burst onto the scene, except to a lesser extent, in Denver, where he improved on his drops. He improved on the inconsistent play that we saw from him in his rookie season. He's almost certainly going to be a top 12 redraft option for this year, despite his surrounding situation, despite having to compete for targets with Cortland Sutton, with Jerry Jeudy, getting targets from Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater, depending on which direction they go there. His value is almost certain to increase after this season, because between Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson rumors swirling around, and his play continuing to progress and continuing to become a more productive option, we could be talking about a guy that enters, everything could fall into place with this dude. He could enter that elite tier of production if he has like a 900-yard, 8-touchdown season this year. Plus, they could go out and trade for Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson, which would just be absolutely skyrocketing his value. He might be a guy that could see himself, skyrocket into the top 3 tight ends as well. I drafted him in our listener startup league. And to me, like I said, he's one of the most sure bets for an appreciating asset that there is. And this is a guy that you're consistently getting in the 7th, 8th round, probably around tight end 6 to 8. I think he is bound to at least achieve that redraft wise this year. And again, we're talking about a 23-year-old tight end whose situation is only going to get better going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you got him in the 8th, near 9th round in the startup, and that's just crazy value.
I traded down twice too, and I almost missed out on him. I was like, I don't want to miss out on this dude. I traded down. He was still on the board, and there were still plenty of other options. I traded down again later in that round. I traded down twice within the 8th round, and I still got him at the 8-11, I think. And
I will tell you right now, I ended up snagging Darren Waller falling to me at the 607. But if I had not gotten Waller to fall to me that far, Fant would have been my target in that 8th round. So kind of worked out for both of us. We both got our guys. But I think Fant's upside is truly, outside of those top 6, really the highest. And at 23 years old and an offense that should be much improved, I fully agree. I think he is the clear-cut appreciating asset of the tight end position. But that being said, we can go on to the next option, and that's going to be Dallas Goedert. Really the final guy that I'm really confident in locking and loading as my tight end 1. Because after him, it's just kind of a hoopla, to be quite honest. But we're talking about Goedert. We've been talking about him as a riser for the past 3 years, because everybody's narrative is, oh, Goddard's going to be that guy when Ertz leaves. He's going to be that guy. He's going to be that guy. He's got the talent. He's going to be that guy. Well, guess what? With the potential trade or cut of Ertz looming this offseason and facing an ambiguous wide receiver room outside of Devonta Smith and Philly, Goedert has that potential to be that true breakout that we've been touting him to be for the last 3 years. And for the record, he's coming off a career best receiving pace this season. He totaled 65 targets, 46 receptions, 524 yards, and 3 touchdowns in 11 games played, or a 67 for 763 and 4 pace, which, if you actually equate it, is nearly identical to what TJ Hockenson put up this year, finishing as the tight end 5. So, again, as I mentioned, he's the last of the tight ends I kind of feel comfortable with locking in as my tight end 1. And there's a clear tier break of stability past him, in my opinion, in Dynasty.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Like, you guys are going to see the difference when we get into who our 9th tight end is. You're going to be like, holy shit, he's your 9th tight end. It's really that big of a drop-off.
Yeah.
To me, if you don't get one of these top 8 guys, you might as well wait at least 2 to 3 to 4 rounds in your Dynasty startup, attack other positions, go for wide receivers, maybe take a third quarterback, whatever the case is. Like, Dallas Goedert's the last dude that I feel comfortable starting week in and week out, and who has some youth on his side as well to potentially grow into something more.
Yep, fully agree with that.
Right. So our number 9 tight end, Irv Smith. I told you it's a big drop off. But so as you can see on the screen right now, Irv Smith, his game logs are maybe not that impressive, right? Impressive first glance. It doesn't look that interesting. But with context, we can see that Irv Smith was slowly starting to take over that starting tight end job in Minnesota last year. And in week 5, there was a shift. In week 5, they played the Seahawks. He had a 72% snap share. He ran 31 routes. After that game, he ran over 20 routes in every game after that he played the full game, because the game against Detroit and the game against Tampa Bay and the game against Green Bay, he left early. So all those games afterwards, he played the full game. And that continued up until he got injured, basically in those games that I just mentioned. And he came back in a limited fashion in week 11, week 14 against Tampa and Detroit, and wasn't back to his full, like, newfound role in weeks 15 to 17, where you can see 88.9% of the snaps, 91.4% of the snaps, and 80% of the snaps to close out the season in games where, I mean, he saw 16 targets over those 3 games, which is a lot for a tight end. And even if we were to include those performances, right, starting in week 5, despite being limited against Detroit, limited against Green Bay, limited against Tampa Bay, he played well. He actually put up some numbers in some of those games that he was limited in. So I'll keep them within the 9-game sample of 37 targets, 28 receptions, 351 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's what his stat line was over those 9 games. If you pace that out to 16 games, that's 65 targets, 50 receptions, 624 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Precisely 141.4 fantasy points in half PPR. And coincidentally, halfway in between Mark Andrews at 141.1 and TJ Hockenson at 141.8. Good for the tight end 5 on the season. So all that being said, that's a lot of information, but with a few limited game in that sample size, and Kyle Rudolph was still on the roster, still playing 60-70% of the time during this period, even if Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen combined for 275, 300 targets, right? That's a lot of volume for those 2 guys. That should leave 200 to 250 targets up for grabs between Irv Smith, between Dalvin Cook, between, Amir Smith-Marset, or whoever else is going to get some of these targets. And Irv Smith showed this efficiency last year when he ranked number 2 in fantasy points per target at tight end and number 8 in yards per target amongst tight ends. So we're talking about a guy that could legitimately, maybe he only gets 80, 90, 100 targets next year. That's fine. He's legitimately going to be a top 5 tight end if he gets that kind of if he gets that kind of target volume. And like we said, this is a big time drop off. This is a huge projection. But to me, this is the next, Jonnu Smith of this season. And I know Jonnu Smith didn't finish as a top 5 tight end, but he was a tight end 1 in fantasy before Corey Davis started to emerge. So if that didn't happen, he would have, finished as a tight end 1. And Irv Smith is, to me, the next guy in line.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. I mentioned, I know I referenced this video before, but in the rookie deep sleepers video, I mentioned with the selection of ISM, with the departure of Kyle Rudolph and no clear, succinct replacement for him, all signs are pointing to the Vikings possibly running a lot more 11 personnel that they've run in recent years. Again, they've been the pinnacle of running 12 personnel with Gary Kubiak in line. With Gary Kubiak gone, with his son replacing them, maybe we do see a lot more 11 personnel looks in there. And that could only help Irv Smith Jr. really dominate that middle of the field without another tight end to compete with. You mentioned you got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen on the outside. Irv Smith is going to be occupying that seam, occupying that intermediate area. And if that's the case, if we can project more volume for a guy as efficient as Irv Smith is, wheels up, because at a cloudy position, This is a guy who can give you that tier break, that clear edge. And if you're getting him again in your startups in the 12th round, 13th round, which is about where he's going, you're absolutely stealing him because for the upside alone, he's worth that pick.
Right. And when you think about the Vikings offense, you think in a 3 wide receiver set, who's playing the slot, right? You'd think it'd be Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen only played 15% of the snaps from the slot last year. Justin Jefferson only played 18%. So Irv Smith could be their legitimate slot receiver in 11 personnel sets, and they could bring in a blocking tight end if that's what they want to do. So they have a lot of versatility with this guy. Remember, Irv Smith is an undersized tight end. He's about 6'2", like 240 pounds. So this guy's more of a combo big wide receiver, Evan Ingram type. So if they want to use him in a variety of ways, they can do that. Yeah,
for sure. And what I loved about Brevin Jordan coming into this draft this year, he's kind of like a B-Tech version of what Irv Smith was at Alabama. And we've seen Irv Smith in the NFL is that elite yards after the catch type player. If he gets that more opportunity, especially as you mentioned, getting more snaps in the slot, the sky's the limit for them. With that being said, we can talk about a interdivision rival at our number 10 spot. And again, we mentioned the clear tier break. Did anybody think coming into this video that we would have Cole Kmet as our tight end 10 in Dynasty? I bet you didn't. But with that being said, I think he's well worth the spot because Jimmy Graham, last year, old no-knees Jimmy Graham, finished as the tight end 13 this past season, despite sharing the field with Kmet over the second half of the year. And quite frankly, the potential of Kmet on his own, if Jimmy Graham does indeed get cut, is tantalizing. As a rookie with limited snaps, he produced 28 receptions, 243 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and averaged nearly 8 points per game or PPR points per game at the position down the stretch, despite those splitting snaps. Seeing Kmet work his way onto the field is encouraging as a 22-year-old tight end. And for a former 43rd overall pick, he is the clear Bears long-term solution at the tight end position. I don't expect this guy like Irv Smith to come out this year 2 breakout, wheels up, for this 2022 season or 2021 season. But when we're talking about 2022 on, and we're talking about Cole Kmet entering his 3rd professional season and Justin Fields having a full season under his belt, I think the sky's the limit for this guy in that connection. And this is a clear upgrade at quarterback comparatively to what he had to deal with Nick Foles and Mr. Trubisky this past season. So overall, give me the tantalizing upside of Cole Kmet and the age and youth and the appreciating asset potential that Cole Kmet provides over really any of these quote-unquote ready-made steady producers that you could be getting at this range of the draft.
Right, because none of these guys that you can get, and we'll get into some honorable mentions in a second, so you'll know who we're talking about, but none of these guys are sure bets for production. None of them are Mark Andrews. None of them are even Dallas Goedert or Noah Fant. So if you need to take a youth tight end like Cole Kmet, maybe you're in a rebuilding situation. Maybe if you're not, you could take a guy like Cole Kmet in the 10th, 11th round of a startup, stash him, and come back and get a Rob Gronkowski or something like that later on in the draft to start this season. And who knows, man, Cole Kmet could come out this year. For one thing, I have no idea what the hell the Bears are doing. Why did they not cut Jimmy Graham and they cut Kyle Fuller and Charles Leno instead? They cut their starting corner and their starting left tackle before they cut Jimmy freaking Graham. And if that's what they needed was money, they should have just cut Jimmy Graham and let him walk. But that's besides the point. Whatever they're doing, Cole Kmet, I expect to be the starting tight end by the halfway point of next season at minimum if he's not already the starting tight end.
For sure. And now we're talking about a guy that you mentioned the ADP 11th, 12th round. I got him at the 1303 in our recent startup. And I think for that type of value, for that type of upside, for that age, his value is only going to go up from here. If he has even remotely a successful season in year 2, year 3, you're flipping him for a rookie second plus. And that just goes to show you people are desperate for tight ends. People are desperate for producers and no real options after those top 8 provide much upside comparatively to an Irv Smith or a Cole Kmet. So I fully agree. Those are the top 2 after the 8. And now we can get into some
real quick. I just want to touch on one more thing with Kmet. If you look back at his game logs too, much like Irv Smith, you saw him start to take over that job as quickly as last year. By week 10 against Minnesota, he played no higher than 40% of the snaps before that. He played 68% in week 10, then 79%, 94%, 85%, 100%, 92%, and 87%. That type of snap share and the amount of routes that he was running between, 15 and 30 routes in those games tells me that he is the starting tight end of this team. And if Jimmy Graham is on the roster next year, which again is still yet to be determined, I think Cole Kmet's the starting tight end, runs the most routes, plays the most snaps of the whole shebang. And like we said, Cole Kmet, he didn't produce down the stretch. He only had one game of over 10 fantasy points, but at the same time, you're talking about an offense that really only has Allen Robinson as a decisive, established target. Darnell Mooney's a fun piece, but we don't really know what we're going to get out of Darnell Mooney either. And if Cole Kmet can come in and, make good friends with Justin Fields right away, then we could be talking about a guy that establishes himself as the number 2 option in this offense.
Yep, no, I fully agree. So now we can get into some honorable mentions. And to start off the honorable mentions, we're going to go with our boy from last year, the guy that we touted all season, Jonnu Smith. Now, if he did not land where he did, he would be much, much higher on this list. But the fact that
even if he did, but Hunter Henry didn't.
Literally, though. No, sorry, that's what I mean. Given the circumstances with Henry, sorry. Right. The capital was there, the opportunity was there, and then smelly old Hunter Henry had to just join the team. But with that being said, you can kind of talk about him a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I think the telling thing with Jonnu Smith is that they signed him first. So they did go out and get him first. They paid him more money, and Hunter Henry was, added after the fact. So if nothing else, I have to have him ranked higher than Hunter Henry because from a touchdown perspective, these guys both offer something in the red zone. But with Jonnu Smith, we've seen it to a very, very efficient degree, whereas Hunter Henry's been more of a volume option. And Jonnu Smith's a guy that's been praised by Bill Belichick before. He talks about his versatility and all that stuff. Maybe they're going to use him in the Aaron Hernandez role that they used to use back in the day. I don't really know what to think of Jonnu Smith. This is, again, just proof that tight end just gets really ugly really fast. Jonnu Smith at least is a guy that has potential high efficiency coming in an offense that has Nelson Aguilar as the number 1 receiver right now. Like, this is a situation where if they throw the ball, 500 times this year, Jonnu Smith could potentially cut into that target share. And same even with Hunter Henry too. They could both be top 15 tight ends.
Yep, no, I fully agree. And to be quite honest, we've seen the flashes of upside that Jonnu Smith possesses. For the first 4 games that he played this year, 13.6, 25.4, 11.1, 21 points in full PPR format. I mean, this is just an absolute baller when he gets the opportunity. The problem is he ever going to get that opportunity to be that true number 1 overall guy? We have yet to see it because even this past year, we saw Ferkser kind of dip into his snaps a bit by the end of the season. But overall, I'm betting on the talent. And at this current point in the draft, just give me a talented player in Jonnu Smith, who just signed one of the most expensive tight end contracts we've ever seen. So,
and he's also quite young as well, too. I believe he's probably only like 26 years old.
Yep, for sure. With that being said, we'll talk about Mike Gesicki. Really good tight end season he's coming off of. I believe he was the tight end 6 this past year. Let me just double check.
Like that. He definitely had a great back end of the season. Once Tua started to get a little bit more comfortable, he really trusted Mike Gesicki more and more. And before Mike Gesicki went out, he was having a phenomenal game. That game that he got injured in. And I think with Mike Gesicki, we have the addition of Hunter Long, obviously, where it looks like Miami is hedging their bet and saying goodbye to Mike Gesicki after this year. But we've mentioned this on numerous occasions with other players. But if Mike Gesicki hits free agency, you might be able to sell people on the unknown, right? Because Mike Gesicki was pretty freaky as an athlete at Penn State when he was coming out of school. He has a great profile. He's a guy that if he gets a big contract or a decent sized contract, which is probably pretty likely, he'll be one of the better tight ends on the market outside of, OJ Howard and maybe a couple other guys. He's probably a guy set to see a similar contract to what Jonnu Smith got. And if that's the case, you could probably sell him based on his contract alone, let alone what he does this year if he does produce for you this year.
Yep, 100%. And we'll just group 13 to 15 kind of together with actually a tie at 15. We're going to talk about Austin Hooper, Logan Thomas, and then Tyler Higbee and Hunter Henry in order. So with that being said, Austin Hooper, I mean, where else were we going to put him? He signed a big deal last offseason, didn't really have a great season this past year. And even when he was on the field, he wasn't really productive. He was 20th in PPR points per game, but he's a name. He produced before. Maybe he gets a bigger
passing
role.
Offense should get a little bit better second year under Kevin Stefanski. If Odell Beckham's back, he should, draw some attention away. So Hooper is a guy that is not exciting. He's not sexy at all. He's probably going to be a top 12 tight end in redraft on finish, but you're probably not going to like the journey that it took you to get there.
100%. And Logan Thomas, if they didn't add so much to the receiving game in the draft and in the offseason, he probably would have been a big target of ours. But thing is, they added Curtis Samuel in free agency, nearly $12 million per year. And then they ended up drafting one of our favorite receivers in this entire draft in the 3rd round with De'Ami Brown, with Terry McLaurin still in town. So overall, this is a guy who relied on elite volume this past season. I believe he had almost 110 targets this past year.
He had more targets than A.J. Brown had this year.
Yeah, so that just goes to show you we don't think that the targets for him are going to be there with that increased competition. And if he's not getting that elite volume, we've really yet to see what he could do without that volume. So
and he's 30. He's 30
yeah.
years old too. So he's the guy who just broke onto the scene last year, but he's 30 years old because he's been in the NFL since 2014. And then Higbee and Hunter Henry, I mean, these two guys are guys that could produce this year, but there's some definite question marks about them. I don't expect them to have any kind of top 6 type of ceiling. The only one thing I would say for Tyler Higbee is that if Matthew Stafford comes in and just absolutely lights up the league, which is definitely within the range of outcomes, because we all know that Matthew Stafford has been one of the most underrated quarterbacks throughout his entire time in Detroit. He has never been in a situation like this. And Tyler Higbee, now with Gerald Everett departing to Seattle, could see a situation where he's a 90 target tight end and is very involved in the red zone for a top 5 offense. And that could definitely springboard him into someone like Robert Tonyan, like we saw this past year, where he had, 10, 12 touchdowns, however many he had. And that kind of springboarded him into top 6 tight end range. So I could see that from Tyler Higbee. He's a guy that I don't hate, especially if you were to take a guy like Cole Kmet and you wanted to pair him with a Tyler Higbee in a dynasty startup. I don't hate that move either because, Tyler Higbee isn't the youngest guy in the world, but he also does have some stability in terms of his contract that he signed last year with the Rams.
Yeah, 100%. And then we could talk about Hunter Henry quickly. Both him and Johnny would be higher if they didn't sign for the same freaking team, which is just so annoying. With that being said, I think he'll be a fine tight end 2 type option. And getting him here as a tight end 15, you've seen the track record. You've seen he's been able to produce in the NFL recently. So take a chance around him or on him around here. So that being said, hopefully you made it this far in the video. If you made it this far, what are we going to comment?
With that being said, since you said it 13 times, I actually counted.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, damn. I mean, what is that, a rate of 1 per 4 minutes?
Yeah, it's almost every time we go into a new ranking of a player, you're like, with that being said, let's go into our tight end 6. With that being said, let's go into our tight end 7.
Hey, yeah, comment down below with that being said. And sorry if any of y'all get offended by it, but that's just how I roll, I guess. But anyways, peace out, y'all.